Good morning, everyone. I'm Harriet Haldenby, and I'm an urban designer at Urban Movement. And for those of you that don't know Urban Movement, we're sort of a multidisciplinary practice, and we kind of come together to design street space and public realm, but with a real kind of appreciation for the complexities of traffic and movement in our urban areas. And so I've been asked today to talk a little bit about the practicalities of how we get people walking and cycling, and this will really feed into our later discussions on 20-minute neighbourhoods. So there's sort of all these amazing ingredients that come together to create 20-minute neighbourhoods, density of people, density of amenities, but there's still lots of things that are stopping us walking and cycling. So it's a lot to discuss in 15 minutes. I'm not going to solve it today, but it'll be a little bit of a whistle-stop tour of the key principles and design tools that are available for us to use. So why do we need to get people walking and cycling? There's so many reasons, but some of the key ones are that things like physical inactivity are responsible for 1 in 6 deaths in the UK. The current levels of physical inactivity are costing our NHS up to around £1 billion per year. There's lots of also economic benefits to getting people walking and cycling. So if we can put in a really good walking scheme in a local centre, we can increase the shopping footfall by up to 40%. And there's also a sort of really shocking headline in that bottom right corner that I heard on the radio last week, that currently our UK children are spending less time outdoors than prison inmates, which sort of says a lot about what we're prioritising. And it's just, it's certainly something that I like to feel like I'm contributing towards, is getting our young people outside. So what's stopping us from walking and cycling more? There's lots of reasons, again, cost of bikes, the weather, topography, but actually one of the main barriers that people report is feeling that the roads are too unsafe to cycle on. So that's around 62% of UK adults. And that, part and parcel of that is that the conditions don't feel suitable to deal with that level of traffic. And that makes sort of walking and cycling often not very inclusive. In terms of problems on the ground, again, these feel really obvious and like I shouldn't have to lay them out, but on a site visit just last week, my camera reel is now just full of all these problems that have existed for a really long time. We haven't got around to fixing them. And unfortunately, things that are still being delivered, in the past kind of 5 or 10 years. So things like overly wide carriageways and junctions, they're really difficult to navigate when you're walking and cycling. Indirect and staggered crossings where you're effectively abandoned in a metal sheet pen in the middle of the road. Things like pavement clutter, so whether that's bins, signage, parked vehicles, and we've still got the real basics like having dropped curbs in the right place to help us out that are still lacking. So what makes a good walking or cycling journey? 5 of the key principles are that our walking and cycling routes need to be coherent, they need to be easy to understand and follow. They also need to be direct. So if you're walking and cycling, you're exerting more energy than someone that's driving. So it's really important that we help those people get from A to B quickly. It needs to be attractive. We should be able to enjoy traveling around. It's a huge part of our day. It also needs to be safe, so people walking and cycling are our most vulnerable road users. And then finally, it needs to be comfortable. And that sounds like a little bit of a nice to have. So for a lot of us in this room, if a surface is a little bit bumpy or a dropped curb is missing, it's a little bit inconvenient, a bit uncomfortable. But for some people, that could be really quite painful, of real significant discomfort, and it could be enough to stop them kind of making that journey in that way. So something that really should guide the way we design for walking and cycling. Lots of really good guidance out there. I think this is sort of our bread and butter in our office. So we've got the National Cycle Design Guidance, Manual for Streets, the Healthy Streets Checklist, and we quite like to use the Pedestrian Comfort Guidance for London, simply because these guides are very people-focused, and I think they're quite generous in their approach. So we like to sort of hold that up as our gold standard and then work out what our compromises are going to be. So today, we're going to think about getting the footways right, the crossings right, what cycle design approaches and tools we can use, and how we choose the type of cycle approach to take. So lots of not very exciting lists, but I think it's important to go back to the basics sometimes. So in terms of getting the footways right, we're looking at really ideally a clearance width of 2.2 meters. And so we're sort of starting with that as our basis. And that will allow 2 people either in wheelchairs or pushing buggies to pass each other quite comfortably. Our footways should be smooth, flat, uninterrupted. We need to be thinking about things like corner radii, so really reducing them to the absolute minimum, and that will reduce our crossing distances for people walking and cycling. And really, we should be designing with that in mind and not around sort of the larger vehicles that use our streets very rarely. We also need things like seating and resting every 50 minutes. This isn't just a nice to have, it can be the difference between someone choosing to walk a journey or not. And we need things like shade and shelter, and to reduce street clutter like signage. And then finally, things where we have got space, where we're lucky enough to have space in our streetscape for street furniture, greenery, these should really be kind of organised into a clear zone. So we've got a clear movement area, and then we've got our furniture zone. And this is a nice example in the bottom right of Sauchiehall Street in Glasgow. So there's sort of a very clear delineation between our sort of movement area and our resting area. And it is quite formal, but I think it's quite a good principle to base our design work on. Getting the crossings right, we need these to be, it's all super obvious stuff on the design line. We should be raising them where we can to footway and cycle level. It just brings together that point on comfort. We should really be avoiding staggered crossings. They're not really working for any of us. Where we do have to stagger, we need to make sure we're providing really kind of comfortable waiting spaces for people pushing pushchairs, wheeling bikes, things like that. We should have formal crossings at every junction as a given, and we should be looking to provide some mid-link crossings in addition. So really, you shouldn't have to travel more than 50 metres in our urban areas to find a crossing point. And ultimately, we should be basing our decisions around crossings with the idea of furthering pedestrian priority rather than thinking about traffic capacity. Coming back to drop curbs again, absolutely essential. And a final way that we can make crossing easier is to just really reduce the distances we're having to cross. So reducing the widths of our carriageways and also increasing the green man time. So when it comes to cycling, there's two main approaches we can take, one being sort of protected infrastructure, which is sort of the more heavy infrastructure approach, or we've got quiet streets, also called mixed cycling. And when it comes to protected cycle tracks, again, probably preaching to the choir here really, but we've got sort of really well-protected tracks like our fully segregated one in the top right, or our step cycle track in the middle there. So these are kind of in environments where we can't reduce traffic speeds and volumes. These are critical for keeping cyclists safe. We shouldn't be asking people to be brave when they want to get out and about on their bike. And then in the bottom right there, we've got an example of light segregation. And these are great. They can be done with Orca ones or armadillos, and they're really quick to roll out. And they're incredibly flexible as well. I really quite like them, but they're not the most beautiful example that we've got out there. So yeah, this is a really great example for when we can't affect traffic flows and speeds, but they are a more expensive option and they have quite an urban feel to them. So some exciting design requirements, just the key one being that we should be generous in the space that we're giving. LTM 120 has a desirable minimum width for a cycle track of 2 metres, and that's just giving our cyclists a little bit of wiggle room. It's allowing for things like overtaking, and you'll need kind of additional widths in there if you've got fixed objects at the edges of your cycle tracks. And where traffic speeds adjacent are sort of creeping over 30 miles an hour, you need to be giving a little bit more protection between people cycling and people driving. So it's another good point there for keeping speeds low, because it just requires a little bit less space in our streetscape. Cycle routes are only as good as their weakest link, and this is often at junctions and crossings. So we've got lots of tools that we can use in terms of protected crossings, protected cycle junctions. This is an entirely different presentation that would take another 15 to 30 minutes. So we won't go into that today, but I just wanted to mention it as it's a critical part of how we design cycle tracks. Go away and have a read of LTM 120 as a bit of homework there. So our other option, when we can, is quiet ways. So this is also known as mixed cycling. And this kind of approach really requires us to have low traffic speeds and volumes, either already or it's a condition that we can create. So because it has people cycling in the carriageway, so we need to be creating appropriate conditions for that. It can be a really popular approach because it uses the existing carriageway. So it's sort of a low infrastructure approach. It uses the roads we've already got, and that means that in terms of things like maintenance, it's already part of that maintenance budget. They're very affordable because they are so low intervention, and we have lots of them already out there. So a lot of our neighbourhoods, when we're looking at this kind of 20-minute neighbourhood scale, a lot of these streets are all ready to take on this quiet way cycle approach. They're much more subtle in appearance, less highways infrastructure, and also they create quite nice environments for pedestrians as well. It's easier to cross than a cycle track, and it's encouraging lower driving speeds and flows as well. So that's always a positive for people walking. How do we create these? 20 miles an hour is an absolute must as a maximum. Once we start reaching 30 miles an hour, it's just not safe to be cycling in the carriageway for most people. So it makes it not a very inclusive way to design things. We can create a real kind of change in feel to the street. And this is really kind of the gold standard here. This is an example from Cardiff on the Tack Embankment. And they don't all need to look like this. It can be really as simple as just getting those speeds and flows low. But this does a really good job of really reinforcing that feel. So you've got kind of your median strip down the middle, which makes the carriageway feel particularly narrow and encourages drivers to sort of give way to one another. The carriageway is physically narrowed, and it's got things like build-outs with planting. The parking's been nicely organised, so it really gives this sense of a different priority. We've also got, I'm aware I'm running out of time. We've also got modal filters, so simple ones or green ones. We've got, simple as a few bollards. We've got a lovely example in the top right there, which is from Waltham Forest. And the ultimate thing is that they allow people walking and cycling through, but not people to drive through. We've got other traffic restrictions we can bring in, and we've also got, our usual kind of approach to crossings that we can bring in. But I'll just point out the bottom middle image here. So what's really lovely about this image, this is on my way to work, and they've put in effectively a bus gate on this residential street, and the traffic flows are so low there now, and it's so easy to kind of navigate between users that you can actually see they've been able to cover up the signal heads there, so they're hidden in that orange bag because there's no longer a need for them. So it's just become a really lovely sort of low infrastructure environment. There's a fantastic table in LTM 120 that tells us how we choose what kind of cycling infrastructure we want. So it's very much based on speeds and volumes again. And I think sort of there's lots to dig into here, but the main point being is that if you look at that 30-mile-per-hour section in the middle there, the minute you're reaching 30 miles an hour, no matter how low your flows are, you're really looking to need kind of protected cycling space. So again, it's kind of really leans into that argument for perhaps 20 is plenty where we've got people walking and cycling. Just to wrap up, have we done it? No, it's a huge challenge. We've got a long way to go. And we're not suddenly going to transform all journeys to walking and cycling. There's plenty of good reasons to use other modes. But I think we've all got a responsibility in our various roles to give people a little bit more choice. We should start with the traffic. Can we reduce it? And if not, what other tools do we have? We need to sort out the footways and sort out the crossings, and then that creates room for the fun stuff that we like to see in our streets. There's so many other things to think about. We could have sort of 20 presentations on this. And then finally, just be complete. It's a real privilege to be able to mess with our existing streets and to be able to design new ones. So really think about the whole street from building to building and start with that people space and know how much you want to give. And if space requires that we start to chip away at that people space, it's good that we have to justify that rather than doing it as a given. So yeah, I'll leave you with that slide showing all the kind of nice things in our street that I don't have time to talk about.
Wonderful.